I'm Andrea, a passionate DEI advocate and consultant on a mission. Join me in each episode as we celebrate diversity, ignite conversations, and craft workplaces and educational institutions where everyone thrives. This podcast is my commitment to making a meaningful impact on the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So are you ready? Let's get diversifused. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Get Diversifused podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Horton-Mericli, founder of Diversifused DEI Consulting and a passionate DEI advocate and ally. In today's episode, we'll discuss inclusive leadership and strategies for building diverse and thriving teams with our guest speaker, Grant Harris.
FYI, our episode today will be cameras off.
Grant is a certified diversity executive, consultant, speaker, podcast host, corporate board member, and autistic author of a series of books on various workplace culture-related topics. Grant helps individuals and institutions move beyond compliance to community through his RACE framework while promoting neurodiversity in the workplace, from the boardroom to the mailroom. His passion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, is more than professional, it's personal. Living with a disability, he recognizes the power of inclusion and the importance of equipping others with the tools to overcome obstacles. Embracing a we not me philosophy, his journey is a testament to the unifying force of DEIA, enriching lives and creating a sense of belonging. Grant is the author of Mastering Inclusive Leadership, a guide to thriving in the new era of leadership where diversity and unity from the pillars of successful teams and address common dilemmas, offering current and future leaders a roadmap to transform workplace challenges into their greatest assets. So welcome to the Get Diversifused podcast, Grant. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Awesome, Andrea. Thank you for allowing me to be here, be with your guest. Thank you for that humbling intro. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you and your audience.
Thank you so much. So with that, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your experiences, and how you came to do what you do today?
Yeah, certainly. I don't like to talk about myself, but this question always comes up. So you mentioned several of the things about me in that, but one, for those of you who cannot see me on camera, there's a reason for that, and we'll get there a little bit later in the conversation. I identify as a Black man in America. I am a father, a husband, a brother, and I am also a lifelong learner. I'm a practitioner at heart. I like to do things. Get action is something that Teddy Roosevelt used to say. And I kind of live by one of those, or my life principles is to get action and to do something positive every day. And I also live by a 1% better mantra. I'm always looking to improve myself as a person, how I present myself in the world, how I present myself to my family, always looking to get 1% better. And that's a blessing and a curse, because as soon as I get that 1%, then I'm always looking for the next percent. So that's something that I have to keep in check, and my wife does an excellent job of doing that. I also identify as a person with a disability. I am autistic, which I just found out about a little over 2 years ago. So I'm a late stage, formally diagnosed autistic person. And that has been a journey. Obviously, it's been my entire life, but especially over the last couple of years, finding out more about myself, how I show up in spaces and places with people that I know and that know me the best, and how I show up in spaces and places with people that don't know me and don't know me from anyone else. And those look very different, but they also look very much the same. So that's a little bit about me. In my formative years, I'm an athlete at heart. I was a scholarship football player in college. I'm actually in my high school's Hall of Fame. I was in the inaugural class of their Hall of Fame, which is a great honor. I also hold several degrees and several certifications with long titles that make me sound smarter than what I am. But like I mentioned, I'm a lifelong learner. I'm
Hmm.
always soaking information, reading as much as I can, and also interacting with people like you and different audiences so that I can understand me more and I can understand you more. And that way we all become better people. And that lends itself to my we not we philosophy. But
I
thank you
love it.
for the opportunity to share a little bit more about me.
Thank you so much, Grant. And it was very nice hearing and learning more about you. So you brought up some. It's something that I find that is a recurrent. I wouldn't say a recurring theme, but is happening. I wouldn't say a lot more, but with older professionals, as individuals get a little older, who have been are identified as BIPOC are from a marginalized population or low income, grew up low income or something like that. It's a late diagnosis of autism, and a lot of my female friends who are around my age. Have been diagnosed in the past few years as well, and had been misdiagnosed with many different things along the way throughout their lives. And when they would tell me what their diagnosis was, I was like, but years ago, I was like, that doesn't seem, I don't see that, it's like bipolarism or manic depressive or, it goes all over the place. To finally get the diagnosis of being on the autistic spectrum was so eye-opening and like a weight lifted off their shoulders where everything just made sense. Like everything that they experienced growing up, the struggles that they had just made sense to them finally. Did that sort of happen to you as well? Just out of curiosity, did things just like make sense?
Well, life is hard to make sense out of sometimes,
True.
but I can understand that feeling. In this conversation is I'm happy to have this particular conversation.
Yeah.
Although we're here to talk about inclusive leadership, this
Yes.
builds
Yes.
into that, and I
Hmm.
appreciate the question
Yeah.
because that's how people learn about themselves. So the
Hmm.
way that autism is diagnosed or misdiagnosed in those who identify as men and women, those who identify
Hmm.
as BIPOC, is very different, is vastly different.
Hmm.
Those experiences, the access to the healthcare to gain those diagnoses, the stigmas that go along with that within those
Hmm.
in collective communities is very different. The stigmas and the biases and the prejudices that are in the
Hmm.
education system
Oh
that
yeah.
either mislabeled or
Hmm.
completely miss those people, and they grow up for decades on decades on decades
Hmm.
being a certain way and not quote unquote fitting that mold of whatever personal mold that they try to build for
Hmm.
themselves,
Yeah.
whatever community mold of the external people that were around them.
Hmm.
All of that looks very different from person to person based on all of those classes that we have mentioned. So for me, I never had an issue labeling myself as a person with a disability.
Hmm.
I never had a personal psychological or emotional issue with being labeled autistic. As a matter of fact, I did, and I still do, kind of wear it as a badge of courage. And part
Nice.
of that, I believe, is because I spent time as a special educator and I taught
Ah,
autistic kids before I knew I was autistic. And I spent that
wow.
time majority minority middle
Hmm.
school, English as a second language, uh,
Hmm.
low income, high free and reduced lunch population,
Hmm.
and then classes that I taught were at the time they labeled them restricted, meaning those kids basically stayed in one or two classrooms all day
Yeah.
for every one of their subjects. So
Yeah.
that's the environment that I taught in
Hmm.
and that I was successful in before I ever knew that I was autistic myself. And then
Oh, that.
I had training.
Hmm.
I did not go to school for DEI, so to speak. My undergrad is in psychology. My MBA
Oh.
is in organizational psychology and development. My
Mm-hmm.
postmaster's is in educational leadership and administration.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't go to school for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I lived that through being a person of color,
Mm-hmm.
and being a male person of color in this country as a teacher is an anomaly. Most
Mm-hmm.
teachers in the country are white females, over
Yep.
upwards of 80%. So to be a young black male, this is many years ago, to be a young black male in that environment was an anomaly.
That's
So
true.
all of those things are part of my first and only kind of origin story, being the first to do this in my family or the only one to be in this particular environment. I was the
Mm-hmm.
only black teacher in that school at the time,
Oh,
even though
wow.
most of the people and most of the students around me were black and brown. They didn't see
Mm-hmm.
teachers look like them. So all of that experience kind of helped me uh, synthesize and analyze my
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis, probably different than another person who did not have those types of experiences. That
Yeah.
aside, that doesn't mean that I don't struggle. I certainly
Mm-hmm.
struggle, but I did not, and I do not struggle with the labels of disability and autism from those perspectives because I
Mm-hmm.
was around people and I taught those kids and I was in those environments. So those types of things I don't look at as a curse. I look at them as a blessing.
Mm-hmm. That is awesome. A lot of our professional background aligns very well with each other, and I have so many other questions I'd like to go ask you, but they have nothing to do with inclusive leadership. So I will refrain from asking those questions. But thank you so much for answering that question and giving us a little bit of more insight into you and into the um, uh, labels and barriers and that many people in this country and the world have to live through and try to work through. And so I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Grant. Um, so with that, let's talk about inclusive leadership. Let's get back to our topic. What is inclusive leadership, and can you explain why it's crucial for today's leaders?
Yeah, Andrew, great question. And I think one of the best ways to answer that question is with a story or with a couple of examples.
Okay.
So recently, as I was preparing for this conversation, recently there was a major event celebration or recognition, the
Mm-hmm.
80th anniversary of D-Day.
Yes.
And for your audience, I hope that they know what D-Day was or is,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know where your audience is from.
They're all over the
D-Day
place.
was the invasion of the Allied forces,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Normandy, and at that particular time, the world was on a tilter, and it was
Mm-hmm.
the the success and the fate of the Allied mission to
Mm-hmm.
save the world of democracy teetered on this particular mission. And it was
Right.
the greatest mission in recorded history at that time,
Mm-hmm.
in the way that it was set up. And Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. And when we talk about inclusive leadership, just because you're
Mm-hmm.
president doesn't make you the best leader. Just
Mm-hmm.
because you have a title doesn't make you the best leader. It's what
Yes.
you do with that. It's what you do with that power. It's what you do with that access.
Mm-hmm.
So on this particular day, prior to the invasion, General Eisenhower at the time, he's a four-star general, and I have a military background. I went to a military school.
Oh,
So these two
cool.
examples are from the military.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Four-star general, and he decides that he wants to go see his men at the time. It was men in the battlefield, and
Mm-hmm.
give them support, give them a word of courage before they go on this fateful mission.
Yes.
Uh, so he shows up, and the paratroopers, and the paratroopers were the soldiers who jumped out of planes and parachuted down
Mm-hmm.
into battle, extremely difficult and extreme dangerous position. Because if
Yes.
you imagine yourself jumping out of a plane, one, jumping out of a
Mm-hmm.
plane, period, and
Yeah.
two, doing that with a parachute that's made out of fabric and
Mm-hmm.
jumping into enemy territory where they are shooting at you from the ground up, and you are basically helpless.
Yeah.
These were the soldiers that were trying to get the job done. So he went to see them and have a conversation and give them support and encouragement and boost morale.
Hmm.
And when he got there, these are the stories from soldiers who were there. And there's a very famous picture of President and General Eisenhower speaking to a particular soldier. And it looks like that he's giving him all the encouragement in the world. Go get him, son. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Come to find out, that was in front of him. Take a guess, Andrea, on what they were talking about. It wasn't go get him, soldier. It wasn't that. Take a guess on what they were talking about in that moment, right before they proceed on this fateful mission. Take a guess.
That's a great question. I'm gonna say either uh, family, or either how he was feeling, or what he ate. I don't know.
Mm, well, it did start with an F. It did start with the F. They were talking
Oh,
about fishing.
oh, fishing.
Fishing. So the soldier,
Nice.
he was from Michigan,
Okay.
and the general asked him. Oh, he asked him where he was from,
Uh-huh.
and they were talking about fishing. In this moment where he's about to jump out of a plane, might not come back from this mission. Matter of fact, most soldiers did not come back from this mission,
Hmm.
although it was successful. And the general was not talking about what they're about to do and
Hmm.
pumping them up for this moment in history. He's talking about fishing. And
Wow.
there are other soldiers around. And you say, well, what does that have to do with inclusive leadership? What, why?
Hmm.
Well, he was building, he probably didn't see it that way at the time, but he was building psychological safety,
Yeah.
and he was building a relationship with those men outside of general to soldier and outside of uh, army soldier to army soldier. He was person to person, and
That is
he was
awesome.
meeting them at their level
Hmm.
and talking about something that was safe and harmonious to them in a time that wasn't safe or harmonious.
Yeah.
And that is an example of inclusive leadership,
That
putting
is
people
awesome.
at ease, even though
Hmm.
you have power to put them on an emotional roller coaster. And they
Yeah.
also said, get this, Andrea, they also said that the soldiers, and many accounts of the soldiers being there, said
Hmm.
that they had to basically calm the general down. Like they said, it's going to be all right, general. We got it. We're good. We can
Oh,
take care of it.
wow.
So
Wow.
the fact that at that time his men were that confident
Hmm.
in themselves and they were that confident to put him at ease meant at some point in time that he did the same for them and they were returning that favor.
That is
So
awesome.
that's an example of inclusive leadership from a story perspective, and that's over 80 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's a positive example. And I can give you a negative example that
Oh,
also has military connotations
okay.
and more recent.
I'd love to hear
And
it.
this particular story hits closer to home. I know the people involved,
Oh.
and not naming names. I'm not
Hmm.
naming businesses or organizations or institutions. I'm just
Okay.
giving, the picture on the paper.
Okay.
So uh, there's an institution, and that institution is revered. It's been around for hundreds of years. Many leaders have come and gone, but this
Hmm.
particular leader is first of his kind.
Hmm.
Uh, and in this role, this person is the head of this organization. They're
Okay.
numero uno,
Mhm.
and they were entrusted or have been entrusted with transitioning this institution through a time of turmoil. They've only been on
Okay.
the job a couple of years, and in that couple of years, good things have happened, but
Hmm.
internally, many bad things have happened to the tune of people that have had tenure.
Hmm.
They've been there for decades. They have senior level roles. They see themselves as retiring from this institution.
Yeah.
They leave. They leave on
Oh,
their own.
wow.
They
Wow.
take early retirement. Uh, they decide to leave and not get the benefits of staying for their full tenure
That says a lot.
because of the lack of inclusive leadership, because choices have been made that if uh, you're not a yes person, a yes man, or a yes woman,
Mm-hmm.
then unfortunately you were either relegated to the corner or were forced out of your particular role, or you voluntarily leave because you can no longer participate.
Mm-hmm.
This particular institution has built its reputation on principles and core principles that you and I
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally would identify with.
Okay.
However, the leadership is not embodying those principles.
Oh.
And the middle management uh, is all but gone, all but decimated,
Wow.
all but. And what happens when your middle management is gone, you get this vacuum
Mm-hmm.
of just senior leaders, and the senior leadership circle tightens and constrains. And when
Mm-hmm.
it tightens and constrains, you get siloed and you make decisions
Oh.
based off of that one single silo, and you get echo
Yep.
chambered because the people around you are trying to hold on to their senior position, their senior
Yep.
salary, their senior title.
Yep.
So you get these yes people around you, and no one under in has the ability or the capability or the desire or the motivation to speak out and speak up
Mm-hmm.
because they have seen what's happened to other middle managers.
Wow.
So that type of leadership is the antithesis of inclusive leadership. And this is a modern example from a modern institution that's happening today. So I give you an example from 80 years ago, and I
Mm-hmm.
give you an example from 8 months ago.
Oh, wow.
And the vast differences between the levels of inclusive leadership or not
Mm-hmm.
in a similar environment, both military type of environments,
Mm-hmm.
both formal type of environments, and you see the vast difference. So that's not a definition of inclusive leadership, but that's a picture of
Yeah.
inclusive leadership, what it should be and what it could be,
Mm-hmm.
and what it is and what it shouldn't be, in my opinion.
And why it's crucial.
Yes,
um,
and why it's crucial, because people at the heart. Why
mm-hmm.
inclusive leadership is crucial is because of people.
Yeah.
People living or dying, people uh, succeeding or failing,
Mm-hmm.
people maturing or not,
Yeah.
groups of individuals and groups of people upholding institutional values, institutional principles, reputation, and not just the reputation. There's different types of reputation. I can get on the soapbox about that, but reputation from an institutional perspective. You take hundreds of years to build a reputation in something, and it could take
Mm-hmm.
weeks or a month in order to destroy that
Oh, yeah.
reputation.
Yep.
So these are the reasons why the inclusive leadership of 80 years ago, in
Mm-hmm.
these two examples, far outweighs the less inclusive leadership of the example of today, because at the heart of leadership is you're leading people. You
Yeah.
don't lead yourself. You're not leading lemmings that just follow you off the cliff. You're leading people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the ultimate risk that is run by not practicing inclusive leadership,
Yeah.
is the detriment of your people if you were that leader.
Oh, wow. And those were some great examples of both, you know, a great example of inclusive leadership and bad example of, I mean, an example of not having inclusive leadership. And I really like that you brought the military into it, and World War II. And but based on the military, it's like non-commissioned officers, NCOs. There's a saying in the military that they're the backbone of the military.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same in any organization. The people are the backbone of your company. They're the ones that create, innovate, make a company, have the potential of making a company succeed or fail. And if they're not happy, if you're not um, creating a safe environment for them or making them feel included, heard, have a sense of belonging, um, if they have no incentive to stay or be their best selves, they're not going to. And bottom line, your profits are gonna see it, or lack of profits. And I hate to bring the
So
word
something to
profit
think
in here,
about.
but yeah.
Oh, well, profit. People go into business if you're a for-profit business. You go into
Mm-hmm.
business to make money. Making money, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, is a thing. Making money is a good thing.
Yeah.
How you make money, why you make money, what you do with that money, that's
Mm-hmm.
where you get the moral imperative. Well, why do I want to make this money? Okay, and
Yeah.
once I get it, what am I going to do with it? How am I going to help other people prosper? So,
Yeah.
in my opinion, it's fine to
Yeah.
make money and want to make money. It's the why and the how and the what. And you said
Mm-hmm.
something, and I agree with most of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
You said something that I want to kind of pick up. You said,
Okay.
well, if your employees aren't happy, and you said many other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I venture to say that as a leader, um, it's I'm less concerned with my employees being happy
Mm-hmm.
because guess what, Andrea? In a work environment, you're not always going to like the choices that a
That
particular
is
leader makes.
true. That is
You're not
true.
always
Yeah.
going to be happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're not always happy because
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately we do not live in Shangri-La. However,
That is true.
what's more important is, in my opinion, more important than happiness is how bought in employees are.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have employees that still go to the mat, that still get the job done, that still
Mm-hmm.
clock in, clock out on time, that still are honorable and follow process and procedure as it should be in whatever institution, even when they're not necessarily happy,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you know you have good leadership. When people are doing what they should be doing,
Yeah.
even when they aren't necessarily happy in the moment. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want people being unhappy for extended periods of time. That's obviously bad. But even if they can say, oh, well, that doesn't make me happy right now, but I see the ultimate goal
Yeah.
and I'm still willing to do my part to get to the ultimate goal, although I don't like it right now,
Mm-hmm.
eventually it's going to be better for the entire unit, the
Mm-hmm.
entire squad, the entire department, the entire organization. So while
I
happy is
agree.
good, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
while happy is good, I'm less focused on employee happiness and
Mm-hmm.
more focused on employees being bought in to keep doing the good work, even when they aren't
Mm-hmm.
happy, even when everything isn't as smooth as they would like it to be.
That is true. And I agree with what you had said, because when your employees have that buy-in because they know the why of what they're doing,
Mhm.
um, then those times where they're doing the things that aren't very don't make them all that happy, they don't enjoy as much, they still do it because they know the why, and they know how their job affects their team and the company at large and the community. So yeah, I agree with what you had said. So with that, what are some challenges that leaders face when trying to implement inclusive practices, and how can they overcome them?
Challenge number one when leading people is that
Hmm.
you have to deal with people.
True. That's true.
That's number one challenge. The
Yeah.
number one challenge, in my opinion, in leading people is people
Yeah.
because we are who we are. We are fallible. We are imperfect.
Hmm.
We are large at times. We're just large toddlers. We're
Yeah.
just all of that. So the number one challenge for an inclusive leader in leading people is dealing with people. However, that is also the number one opportunity. Let's say
Okay.
that that's the number one opportunity is dealing with people and molding yourself as a leader and molding individuals and molding communities and molding groups and units over
Hmm.
time. So some of those challenges, some of those common challenges, obviously are communication. Communication, number one. How are you
Hmm.
communicating? How are you listening? Active listening.
Hmm.
How are you asking the right types of questions. So you can't say, well, you're not asking the right question. That's not it for me. It's the right type of question. So the right type of question is a question that makes someone think about their own thinking. I like to make people think about their thinking. I think about my thinking. That's the right type of question. Well, why am I doing it this way? Why do I feel this way? What makes me think that? So when an inclusive leader is asking those types of questions and getting other people to think about who they are and why they operate the way that they do in conjunction with whatever the core principles and values of the organization are, those are the right types of questions. So the challenge is how do you have those conversations and have people talk about those things outside of just getting an answer like a teenager might say, oh, I don't know. I don't know. Well, the other challenge of that is to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is a challenge for leaders if they want to be inclusive. Because for an employee to come into an office, to sit on the other side of a desk, to see your title, to see how you dress, to see how you hear, how you speak, versus anything that they might do or look or hear, there's all that power dynamic there. So how do you break those things down and dismantle those power dynamics? Those are obstacles for inclusive leaders. But if you are vulnerable and say, hey, I'm aware of these obstacles out here, and I don't know what I don't know about these obstacles over here, and get that out up front and be vulnerable with your path and your progress and the obstacles that you have faced, because no leader gets to where they are without failing. No leader gets to where they are without being a follower first. So vulnerability is another common challenge for inclusive leaders. How do you be vulnerable authentically? How do you be vulnerable consistently over time? And how do you be vulnerable to the right people at the right time in the right way? All of these types of things. Those are challenges for inclusive leaders, and seeing these as practices, and these are systemic practices. And in our work, Andrea, we use that word systemic, and 9 times out of 10, we're using it negatively. And systemic is not a negative word. And this is something that I've studied in psychology and something that I studied as an educator. When we talk about behavior, see where I go thinking about my thinking, Andrea. So when we talk about behavior, most parents, we see behavior as good or bad. Well, if you misbehave or if you do behave, well, behavior isn't necessarily good or bad. It just is. And then we as a society assign what good and bad is.
That's
so,
true.
Andrea, for you, maybe growing up as a kid, and I don't know, you can correct me, but maybe growing up as a kid, it's okay for you to put your elbows on the table while you ate. In another household, that was taboo.
Yep.
So if you put your elbows on the table, you're automatically misbehaving, because in a household, in that group of people, in that community, that's deemed as bad.
Yeah.
So we connect that to the policies or the practices or the procedures in an organization. Same thing. Well, I'm supposed to show up for work at 9 o'clock, but I get there at 9:05. That's okay, because this is how this organization does that. That's not misbehaving. But at another organization, and if you're like me, Andrea, if you're 5 minutes early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. So if you're like me, if you're like me, then that's misbehaving because I'm late, and that's bad. But in different organizations, it may not be. So when we talk about behavior, it's not, behavior is just a thing, and communication is a thing. And we assign what is good and bad based on what norms and cultural norms are, and then also how people react to whatever we are giving. So that's something to think about, something to chew on.
Yeah.
But these are the obstacles and these are the challenges to inclusive leadership, which is another challenge, and I'll leave it here, which require that leader to daily take steps back, take 2 steps back from themselves so they can take a step forward to other people, to put themselves in these hierarchies because of title and position and seniority, etc., to dismantle those as much as they can in the position that they have so that they can meet other people where they are. So those are challenges I see for inclusive leaders that are at the beginning of their leadership journey and are well tenured and well seasoned on their leadership journey. They still have to grapple with those same challenges and obstacles.
I agree. And when you put our more globalized workforce in when you involve them, it makes it even more of a challenge because different cultures, different religions, different I mean, everybody has a different way of growing up, as you had said, but just getting to know about different cultures as well, and in different countries, and learn their what's usually typical of a faux pas in that culture.
Oh yeah,
So,
I have that in my house, for example. So
oh,
my wife is Middle Eastern; she's Palestinian, and hand signals mean
oh,
something different to Americans than they do to other people,
yep,
and definitely in Middle Eastern culture. So, for
yep,
example, the thumbs up here in America is a good
oh,
sign.
yeah,
It's a good thing.
yeah,
You did an awesome job. In her
yep,
culture, it's an insult, and she hates it.
yep,
So, like uh, if you give the thumbs up emoji on the phone, like earlier in our relationship and earlier in our
oh,
marriage, she'd get upset and be like, and I'm like, oh, I forgot, because it's like it's a good thing. Now she
yeah,
forgives me, use other emojis. She knows I'm not doing it on purpose, but that's a
yeah,
small thing just within people that know each other. Just like thumbs up,
yeah,
how different and vastly different the reactions are to that, and extrapolate that to daily interactions in the workplace,
yep,
to all from major interactions to minute interactions. And when you really think about it, there are no major and minor. They're all the same, because to you something may be minor, but to me it's major, and vice versa at the same time. And if it's
yep,
happening at the same time, then you should be less concerned with how big or small the infraction is, and more concerned that the infraction happened and how you can alleviate it in the future, so we don't have to deal with that at all.
I
So
agree.
a lot of times it's like, oh, it's not a big deal. Well, it's not a big deal to you, but it's a big deal to the other person, and vice
Yeah,
versa. So if we stop focusing on how big or little it may seem to you in the moment versus the impact, and this is part of what my race framework talks about, is the intent versus the impact. You may not have
yes,
had that intent, but that was the impact. And instead of focusing on, well, that's not what I meant, which is a very intrinsic, uh,
yeah,
uh, selfish
yep,
response,
yep,
it's not what I meant, and you took it wrong. Well, no, you have to take a step back, build the capacity to take the accountability and the ownership as an inclusive leader for the impact that you had, and recognize the impact, not that the other person is still in the wrong because they misunderstood that you didn't mean it that way.
exactly.
All of that, all of that is hard work. But if
It
you want to
is.
be an inclusive leader, that's the work that has to happen on a daily basis.
And not just to at your level, to all levels of employees. Like if you're learning about it, make sure the entire organization is learning about it. So through workshops and trainings and cultural sensitivity workshops, and also or as you had mentioned this. I'm glad you mentioned your RACE framework. That leads to our next question. How can the RACE framework be implemented in different types of organizations?
Yeah, so the framework that I have built over time, it's in my first book. It's an acronym, R.A.C.E. Stands recognize, acknowledge, cultivate, and engage. So recognize, acknowledge, cultivate, and engage. And it's a cyclical framework. It basically never really ends. You're always recognizing, acknowledging, cultivating, and engaging. You may be doing one of them more often or more heavily in a moment, but it's a cyclical framework. So it's for leaders at all types of organizations, but it's certainly for leaders who are introspective and leaders who are looking and have a desire to be better and to do better, and to open themselves up to a reflective process. And it doesn't matter what size organization, it doesn't matter how many subordinates, it doesn't matter how long you've been a leader. If you are open to that 1% better philosophy, then this framework is applies. And within that, like I mentioned, part of that is intent and impact. And you have to acknowledge the intent and the impact you have on your people as a leader. Whether or not you see it, whether or not you feel it, whether or not you hear it, you have to recognize things because your people are going to recognize them in you. So you have to do the same.
That's true.
So recognizing is the first step. Recognize who and where you are. Who are you as a leader? What are your core values? What are your core principles? Should those be your core values? Should they be your principles? How do we build that? And that's a conversation and a process of itself. And then how are those being magnified within the organization? Just because you as a leader have these core values doesn't mean the organization is operating based off of those. The A and the acknowledge, like I mentioned, acknowledge the intent and the impact of what you say, of what you do, your policies, your practices, and your procedures. Who are those intended for? Who are you writing them for? Who are you building them for? And who do they impact? Who do they adversely impact most? And if you can identify who they adversely impact the most, then you can work at breaking down or alleviating those pressure points from that perspective.
Nice.
C is cultivate. Cultivate is all about gaining education, knowledge, like you said, cultural sensitivity. It doesn't matter what your title is or how long you've been a leader. There is someone that has a bigger title than you. There's someone that's been doing it longer than you. And if they haven't been doing it longer, they've been doing it better. And there's someone that's been doing it longer, better, at a higher level, not in the country that you are from, not in the language that you speak, not in the clothes that you wear. So you have to understand that principle because you weren't in that seat. Somebody else was in that seat before you. Even if that position had not been created, even if that leadership role was new, someone else has done that job before. You're not the first one. So, and you're not the only one that's doing it now. So cultivating opportunities to be around those other leaders that have done it longer, better, differently, etc. Cultivating those opportunities, seeking out those opportunities, seeking out new knowledge. Who's doing what? What's the new reading? What's the new best practice? And beyond best practice, what's the new leading practice? Best practice is a common term. I like to talk about leading practices, So that's the cultivation aspect. And last but not least is E for engage. Engage is doing. Put it into action, get action, like Teddy Roosevelt used to say. You got to do it. So it's doing the thing. And the doing the thing doesn't mean, we're going to change all of this overnight. No, doing the thing might be, we see a problem and tomorrow we're going to write down one solution to that problem. Something that's doing.
Yeah.
It's a step-by-step process. It's not a wholesale change because none of this happened overnight. Processes, policies didn't necessarily get racist or ageist, or all the other ist that you can mention. They didn't get that way overnight. They happen over time.
Yes.
And in order to reverse those things, that's going to take time.
Yep.
Time and pressure. I always like to say to my kids and to my wife, something difficult in life is happening, and the only way it's going to get better is time and pressure. You got to wait it out, and you got to keep pushing against that force that's pushing against you. Time and pressure.
Nice.
So
I like that.
that's the R.A.C.E framework, and it does require an open mind. It does require the desire to reflect. And even if you don't have the desire to reflect, that's the only way that it is going to be successful, is to have self-reflection. And if you desire to be an inclusive leader and have those conversations and read books like mine and also by other authors that I respect, if you desire to do those things, then that's the work that has to happen on a regular basis.
I love it. Yeah, self-reflection is so important, because without self-reflecting, you don't know what even implicit biases you may have. It's only you know you the best, and if you self-reflect honestly and openly with yourself, that's the beginning to any type of growth. So
Right.
I really like this R.A.C.E
Yeah.
framework of yours. It's very very step by step. It lays it out very nicely, and I mean, of course, as you said, it's a lot of work, and but I just love how you laid it out for the listeners today. So thank you so much. So with that, are you cool about talking about some neurodiversity in the workplace?
Yes, 100%.
Awesome. Cool. Awesome. So why is promoting neurodiversity important, and what steps can leaders take to support neurodiverse employees?
Again, I go back to that P word, Andrea, people. That's why it's important.
Yes.
It's important because if you care, even if you don't care, if you're a leader and you make widgets, and you are in charge of Acme Corporation and you make widgets, and widgets are how you make your money.
Yeah.
And even if you don't care who you sell those widgets to, you care that the widget gets made so you can sell it to someone so that you can make money. And the only way the widget gets made is you're not making it as a leader. Your people are making the widget, whatever it is. So you, at minimum, have to keep them alive. At minimum, you have to keep your people alive so that they can create whatever it is that you are trying to sell. And if you can't see the picture that I'm painting, that would basically be slavery. That is the bare minimum
You're
of
right.
organizational leadership, is enslaving a person, keeping them alive long enough and strong enough to do the work that I need to create the product that I want to sell. And we have been through that before.
Yes, we have.
And most, if not all of our corporate entities and corporate structure in this country has been based off of slavery.
Yeah.
So, but what does that have to do with being neurodiverse, you would ask? So, and this is also part, Andrea, this is also part of how my brain works. I see dots out in the stratosphere, and I try to connect these dots that seemingly don't go together or seemingly don't exist in the first place. And I don't know how well I do it. Some people tell me that I do it well. I don't believe in all of that, but that's how my brain works. So
well, I'm following you.
How do we go from slavery to neurodiversity in the workplace? So when you have a group of people that is working for you, the assumption is that, as a leader, the assumption is that those people think like you. They may not be the actual leader, but the assumption is that they think like you. Oh, I love making these widgets because they make me so happy, and I get to sell them, and I'm fulfilled by making these widgets. That's the assumption number one, is that the people that are under you think like you. And that is not the case. So upwards of 20% of the world's population has been reported to be neurodiverse, and those are the people that have stepped up and raised their hand. And I know people that are counting those people that are raising their hands. It's basically like a global census to say, raise your hand, neurodiverse. I'm part of that community. So that number is getting more specific as we grow in this work. Take it down to the next granular level, upwards of 30% of corporate America has employees currently that are neurodiverse in the workplace that are documented. On the flip side of that, there are some studies that say upwards of 70% of people who are neurodivergent, either self-diagnosed or formally diagnosed, do not disclose that in the workplace for one reason or the other.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, Andrea, you have a significant portion of the current working population who is identified, and you have a vastly significant portion of the current working population who has not identified that they are different than the people that they are working for from a leadership perspective.
True. That is true.
So if you have a population of slaves that are thinking differently than you automatically in terms of how they put those widgets together, because you aren't putting the widget together, you're just making sure that they do it at a certain rate and at a certain output. So this also goes to, if the leader is not making the widget and they only care that the employee is producing that widget at a certain rate and at a certain number, then that begs the question, Andrea, why should the leader care how the employee makes that widget, as long as they are staying within the boundaries of what is set as in terms of, we want this many on this day and we want this many in this hour? What does it matter how that widget gets made? It doesn't. It shouldn't. So if I make the widget a certain way and you make the widget a certain way because you think differently than I do and vice versa, but we still have that similar output, why should the way that we think differently matter? It shouldn't, but it does. And it does because of societal norms and cultural norms. Well, I want you to make the widget the way that I want you to make it because I think that you think like I do, because that makes me comfortable. And if I'm comfortable, then automatically you should be comfortable. And that's not the case. So I use those rudimentary examples, widgets, etc., to paint the larger picture that people with power, people in authority positions, people with responsibility for profits assume that the people that are doing the work are doing it because they want to and are doing it in the way that the leaders think that it should be done. And that is not. And the leaders think that the people that are making the widgets are comfortable enough to speak up and speak out about the fact that they don't like how the widget is being made, or that they can conceive of a better, more effective, more efficient, more equitable way to create that widget. So that's where the neurodiversity comes in. And that's why it's important to talk about it from the boardroom to the mailroom. I also say from the boardroom to the mailroom because I happen to be a corporate board member. I sit on nonprofit and for-profit boards.
Oh, nice.
So I have responsibility and I have governance in several organizations to think differently. I don't have the responsibility from a charter organizational perspective. No one has said that out loud. But in terms of what I bring to the table, that non-linear thinking, and that's something that you should add to your vocabulary, Andrea, if you have not. So non-linear thinking, because linear is the norm. Linear is typical, but non-linear is quote unquote abnormal, and is atypical. Non-linear thinking, how do we govern from a non-linear perspective? Not doing it the same way that it's been done for centuries before, et cetera, et cetera. So into the mailroom means every part of the organization, from the intern coming in on their first day, all the way up to the CEO and president. There are Fortune 500 companies that has happened. Andrea, they have been the person came in and they started
Mm-hmm.
their career as intern, and now they are CEO, president of that organization, which is a great story because they've been at
Yeah.
every part of the organization. That doesn't always happen,
Mm-hmm.
but that gives you the opportunity to be a more inclusive leader because you've seen what's happened at the bottom. You've
You've done it.
seen what's happened. You've done
Yeah.
it. You've seen it.
Yeah.
You felt it. You've experienced it. You've been in the
Yeah.
mailroom. So, and now you're at the boardroom.
Yeah.
So that's why I say from the boardroom to the mailroom. That's why I say it's important in the workplace. If an inclusive leader
Mm-hmm.
cares about the outputs and the outcomes of their workforce, then you should care that all of the workforce is distinct in their own way, and you should
Mm-hmm.
provide the opportunity to live a life of distinction, is what I like to say. Live a
Yeah.
life of distinction uh, through that work that they're doing, no matter what that particular widget is.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. It's I love that you brought up the fact that a lot of leaders think that everybody else thinks like them. A lot of, and actually, it's not just leaders, but a lot of people think that if they haven't been exposed to other cultures, other demographics, they think everybody thinks like them. It's they don't
Mm-hmm.
understand that there's another way. There's a whole other way of living life that people of struggling, of being labeled, of living paycheck to paycheck, and
Mm-hmm.
doing a job. It's not their career; it's a job to pay the bills. And there's a lot of still in today's society, a lot of that bubble type of thinking, and I call it thinking in a bubble, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's the bubbles just need to be popped, and people's minds need to be exposed to other ways of thinking, other ways of living, other uh, ways of doing. Because, as you said, not everybody does the same thing. When you were talking about the widgets and making it like some, you may make it one way, I may make it another. I was thinking of a puzzle also. It's like not everybody starts a puzzle the same way. Some people start with the borders. Some people start inside. Some people start, by matching colors, but it produces the same result.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has their own way of doing something to get to the same end product. As long as safety and other things have not been compromised, um, then yeah, it's embracing that um, different way of thinking and doing is a huge plus to any organization and community. So,
Yeah, 100%.
yeah.
And there's a significant portion of Fortune 500 CEOs that identify as some type of neurodiverse or
Mm-hmm.
neurodistinct, but they identify as such in in private surveys, but not in public. And that
Mm.
is unfortunate because that perpetuates the stigma that something
Yeah.
is wrong. That's not being a transparent leader. That's
Yeah.
hiding your ability. That
Mm-hmm.
is promoting a deficit based mindset and a deficit based thinking versus a strengths based mindset to
Yeah.
say, well, this is me. And while it may be harder for me to do X over here,
Mm-hmm.
I can do Y better or easier or whatever it may be. So it's unfortunate that
Yeah.
a significant portion of CEOs, but it goes to show that in corporate America, strength and perfectionism and ableism, all of
Mm-hmm.
these things are uh, more prominent and happen to
Yeah.
be the focus of those folks because they had to, one, either they struggled a lot to get where they are,
Mm-hmm.
or it
Yeah.
was handed to them. There's no like kind of in between. Either
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of struggle and they quote unquote pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, which nobody actually does,
Mm-hmm.
or it was handed to them on a silver platter and they don't want to lose either way. They don't want to
Yeah.
lose what they have gained.
Yeah.
If they had to earn it so hard, they don't want to lose it. And if it
Yeah.
was given to them on a silver platter, why would I want to do any of that hard work? I'm already here. I would just want to stay here. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to show any kind of chink in the armor. I'm not going to show any kind of weakness. I'm not going to show any kind of doubt or difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that perpetuates these negative stereotypes
Yeah,
from the
it does.
boardrooms. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one of my other guests had said that a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but many successful entrepreneurs are neurodiverse, and it's because
Yeah.
of their ability to think out of the box and differently from the norm, what the norm, you know, quote unquote, the norm should be, that has helped promote their success. And um, unfortunately, as you said, not many of them publicly identify, and some of them actually publicly uh, what's the word, not decline, but deny. And
Yeah.
it's sad because it does keep promoting that stigma of labels, and it's bad to be, you know, identify as this type of individual, or this type of individual, or intersectional identity, you know, multiple identities, of like whether you're LGBTQ plus and a neurodiverse individual who is Native American, you know, it's a woman, or a black man, or, you know, it's and it's something that just needs to change. And these conversations are so important to have, because it it's important to talk about, because it's going to let others hopefully hear these conversations and know that it's okay to be yourself, and be proud of who you are. And yeah, people are going to label you. There's always going to be people that are going to label you, but there's going to be others that are going to embrace you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those people that embrace you that you can lean on in the times of in those times of hardship and struggle, and challenges, because it is, to break out of that mold of the norm, of what is the norm. um, Sometimes you do feel alone, and it is hard. And if
Well,
you
I can
have,
tell you, Andrea,
Mhm.
normal is boring.
It is boring. Yes, it is. To me, it's like, one of my other guests is like, we identify things as food. You know, with food, like this, you know, you got to have some spices in there and ingredients in there,
Yeah.
because bland is blah. You know, and it's like you need some flavor. And
Yeah. Gotta
so
have some.
and yeah, it just
And
makes
that's
it more
why this
interesting.
conversation is so important.
Yep.
And that's why what you do and your platform is so important. And I
Thank you.
appreciate the opportunity to have a
Thank you.
conversation with. We could
And I,
go all night.
yes, we
But
can. But we won't. So I we won't talk about inclusive hiring practices, because I know we're over time. So let me just get into the key takeaways, Grant. Listeners, today Grant and I spoke about understanding inclusive leadership. We talked about what inclusive leadership looks like in practice, and why it's essential for modern organizations. And we talked, Grant gave us some strategies for leaders to cultivate an inclusive culture that goes beyond compliance and fosters genuine community. Grant talked about his R.A.C.E framework. And R.A.C.E, if you don't remember, stands for Recognize, Acknowledge, Cultivate, and Engage. He gave a detailed explanation of what the R.A.C.E framework is, and how it can be applied to create a more inclusive and diverse workplace. We talked about promoting neurodiversity and its importance in the workplace, and some actionable steps for leaders to support neurodiverse employees. And next steps for our listeners: educate yourself. As Grant said, it's like read books. You know, I believe in lifelong learning also, Grant, and I'm constantly reading, or taking workshops or webinars, or getting on LinkedIn Learning, because life is learning. If you think that you learned everything and you know everything, you don't. It's like you got to keep educating yourself. So educate yourself to gain deeper insights into inclusive leadership practices and strategies to transform your team dynamics by reading books like Mastering Inclusive Leadership by Grant Harris. Grant, I will be putting your books and links to your books in one of the end slides of our podcast today, so listeners will know where to go. I'll also be putting links to Grant's books in the summary of our podcast. Implement the RACE framework. Start integrating the RACE framework within your organization to foster a sense of community and promote diversity and inclusion at all levels, from the boardroom to the mailroom. Promote neurodiversity. Take actionable steps to support neurodiverse employees and colleagues and create an inclusive work environment. Advocate for and support neurodivergent employees and colleagues by creating inclusive policies and practices. Engage in continuous learning. Follow Grant Harris on LinkedIn and other platforms for ongoing insights and updates on DEI practices. Adopt a we, not me mindset. Encourage a collective approach to problem solving and team collaboration in your workplace. And join the conversation. Participate in discussions and forums related to DEI to share experiences and learn from others. Grant, if anyone wants to get a hold of you, what are the best ways for someone to reach out to you if they want to have you as a guest speaker or just connect with you, or to hire you to come in as a consultant?
Well, first and foremost, yes to everything that you just said, Andrea, in terms of key takeaways. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You can reach me at grant@compliancecommunity.com. That is my email. I am on LinkedIn. That's my only social media platform on purpose. Find me there. And you can find my current trilogy of books on Amazon. And my website is compliancecommunity.com. And thank you, Andrea, for listing those links in your platform as well.
Yes, I will definitely list them. So listeners, at the end of the podcast, there will be links to Grant's contact information, his website, and as well as his books, and some additional suggested resources about creating inclusive leadership and inclusive environments in your organization. Grant, are there any additional key takeaways or next steps that you want to suggest to our learners?
Yeah, certainly. Again, thank you, Andrea, for the opportunity to address your audience. I, again, want to reiterate that we all deserve to live a life full of distinction, whatever that may be for you and whatever that is for me. But I encourage you to find your personal distinction and to live a life full of it. Thank you. Nice.
I love it. Thank you so much, Grant. And I really enjoyed having you on the Get Diverse Views podcast, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot from you today, so I just am honored to have you on today's podcast. So thank you so much for agreeing to come and talking to our listeners.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome. With that, listeners, I will let you go. Remember, stay diversifused. To be a guest speaker on the Get Diverse Views podcast, I'm on the lookout for guests. So if you're passionate about DEI and would like to share your unique insights, experiences, or success stories, I want to hear from you. If you're a fellow podcaster who's passionate about DEI, let's swap the mic and amplify each other's voices. If you're interested in being a guest, reach out to me at andrea@diversifuse.com and I'll send you the link to our guest interest form. Hope to hear from you soon. Remember, stay diversifused. Now go out there and make a difference. And as always, for more strategies on building inclusive workplaces and communities, check out Diversifuse. We're here to guide you on your DEI journey. Make sure to visit our website at diversifuse.com and follow us on social media for the latest happenings, blog posts, tips, and events.